Anesthesiologists of Reddit. What was something you won't forget hearing from someone that was under? Story 1. My mom worked the night shift for 15 years and couldn't sleep during the day, so her doctor prescribed her some Ambien so she could get some rest. I was maybe 12 or so at the time. One day, she poked her head into my room when she should have been sleeping with the most zonked out expression I've ever seen. Just opened my door, stared at me like a zombie, then shuffled away. She must have done the same thing to my little sister, 8, because she came into my room a second later, clearly horrified. We found my mom in the kitchen, sitting on the bench at the table in a daze. I grabbed the camcorder because this was too weird. We tried to get her to go to bed, but she refused until we got her a cup of milk. We did, but she didn't drink it, just stared at it. So we helped her up and told her we were taking her to bed. She refused again and would only agree if she could put on her slippers. We walked her to her slippers, but she claimed she couldn't wear them because she only had 2 slippers, but 4 feet. I told her, no, she's got 2 feet like everyone. She got irritated because she could obviously see 4 feet, like a dog, and she wasn't a dog. So we told her to put 2 of her feet in and go barefoot with her extra feet. She started doing a weird shuffle jump, trying to get both feet into her slippers at the same time. Eventually, we managed to get her to bed. She remembered none of this when she woke up hours later. Luckily, I had the whole ordeal on tape, which she refused to watch out of embarrassment. She never took Ambien again. Story 2. My husband had knee surgery, and after he woke up, he half whispered that he wants apple juice. So the nurse gave it to him, several small cups full. He grinned like a toddler and said, "Apple juice," and immediately flopped back and went back to sleep for all of 10 minutes, until he woke back up, gasping that he couldn't breathe. His mom, who I had met maybe 1 or 2 times at this point, went up to the foot of his bed to grab a nurse in the doorway, and he bolted upright. That man projectile vomited pure apple juice directly into her face, and I have never seen anything like it in my entire life. His mom stood there soaked in juice vomit, and he just rubbed his eyes and said, I feel better. Bam, back to sleep for another 2 hours, just like that. Reply 1. My husband flashed a nosy old lady at the hospital, and I couldn't laugh. He has a thing where stuff that makes most people faint makes him have a seizure, which is not great, obviously, but knowing that and what to do isn't as scary. Anyway, he was getting his tonsils out, and when they put the IV in, he seized, which sent the nurse into a full-blown panic, and she called a code blue, which, as you can imagine, got quite a response. In all the commotion, there was an old woman, like probably 80 years old, standing in the hallway gawking, when suddenly my husband's legs went up into the air, and she got a full view of everything. Story 3. I'm sure the anesthesiologist that did my son's dental surgery will never forget him. Specifically because he came out after the fact, clearly trying very hard not to laugh to tell my wife about it. Kiddo was just chatting away while he was getting ready. Now, my son is autistic, and at the time had a very distinct way of speaking and pattern of emphasis, along with a lisp. Imagine you had a soundboard of Butters from South Park that had all these words on it from vastly different conversations and strung them together into the sentences below, and you'll have a pretty decent idea of it. He sounds a bit different than my son, but it's about as close as I can get. Anyway, just as they're getting ready to put him under, he goes with the sentence, "You're gonna need some hardcore nighttime medicine, 'cause I have ADHD and practically snoring even." They get to work, finish up, and pull the mask off him. The literal second the mask was off his nose, he bolts upright and finishes his sentence from however long earlier. He stated in the end that stuff doesn't work well on him. Story 4. Anesthesiologist here. For better or for worse, I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, so I wear a scrub cap with the Packers' name/colors on it. I was doing a pre-op evaluation on a kid who was a big New Orleans Saints fan, and when I walked into the room, his first words to me were, "Packers." I laughed and continued to prepare him and his family for his redo open heart surgery procedure. Fast forward to surgery a couple of days later, and his mom had come back to the OR as he was going to sleep. Given the fact this was a 3 or 4 time redo sternotomy, going into the chest again, he had a higher risk of major complications from the surgery. I started to push some meds to have him go to sleep while his mom was holding his hand. And as he drifted off, he said, "Wait, I have to tell my mom something." She got emotional, saying how much she loved him, and we were all waiting to hear what he had to say so urgently. I paused, giving him the medication, but he was already well on his way to being under, and as he drifted off to sleep, he said, "Packers." The kid did great. Hope he is doing well, and hopefully will not need any more surgery for 20 plus years. I can't imagine the fear the parents are going through in these kinds of situations. I think when you're the one going through all that stuff, you may be more accepting of how things are, and maybe cope better than those who love you and can only watch helplessly while other people are saving your life. I don't know, but sometimes a little sense of humor like this can help your beloved ones during hospital stays. Story 5. This guy I was dating asked me to take him to get his wisdom teeth removed. He told me that anesthesia doesn't affect him a lot, and we were supposed to go on a road trip the next day. So anyway, he gets wheeled out of the dentist by an old nurse. I'm behind the driver's seat, and I see him smacking his lips and looking up at the sky. She opens my car door, and he said, "I love her," twice. He then proceeded to ask me to marry him several times. He tried to pull out his gauze, and I told him to stop, and he said, "Man, this bitch is bossy." Then he wanted a milkshake. I would suggest a place, and he would scream, "No!" Finally, we agree on a place, and he tells me he'll give me directions. I drive for 15 minutes before I ask him what we were doing, and he said he has no idea. We're in the drive-thru, and he says, "I have something for you." I swear I thought he had bought me a ring the way he had been proposing for the last hour. It was his newly extracted teeth. "They let me keep them. I want you to have them." He lived on base at the time and was yelling at the gate while they checked his ID for them to hurry up. I finally get him to his room, in bed, and he's happily eating his milkshake with a spoon. His mouth was a mess of blood and milkshake. He asked me for a kiss, but I gave him a peck. We're married now. Wow, he's just as sweet when he's not sedated too. So I'm a lucky girl. Story 6. My mom woke up from dental surgery, and when we were leaving the surgeon's office, he gave her a goodie bag with floss and a toothbrush and stuff. And the whole way home, she kept asking if she could eat the candy that the dentist gave her. Every time I told her there was no candy, she looked so heartbroken, like a little kid when their goldfish dies or something. Then we stopped at CVS on the way home, and she wandered off. I found her in the candy aisle holding a giant bag of fun-sized candy, and when I told her to put it back on the shelf, she dropped it on the floor and galloped away, laughing at me. Story 7. I had a guy, nefarious character, heavy drug use history, who got a bunch of ketamine, probably too much, in recovery from one of the other docs to help with severe pain after his abscess drainage. I was asked to check on him in an hour as the other doc had left for the evening. Went over and saw him in the K-hole drooling on himself, but otherwise fine. So I left and came back an hour later. The first thing he says to me is, "Why did you do that to me?" I asked him what he meant, and he said that I don't understand how he lived another man's life there. I apologized and asked him how long did all of that last. For reference, it had been something like an hour and a half or 2 hours since his trip began. Shockingly, he answered that it lasts for nearly 30 years. I was speechless. I apologized again, made sure he knew he was safe, made sure he wasn't hurting, and made damn sure he knew it wasn't me that did it to him. TLDR, patient time traveled 30 years in the K-hole. Story 8. One time I, a male biology student in his early 20s with a stuck kidney stone, was being put under for surgery. Just as the anesthesiologist was pushing meds and telling me to count back from 100, I looked up at him, drugged but focused gaze, and said how pretty he was in that shape. Anesthesiologist was like a grizzled 70-year-old hunchback-looking guy with a lopsided grimace and more ear hair than head hair. Great doc, though. The very last thing I remember hearing was the OR nurses cracking up laughing. It was a smallish medical community, and I knew some of the people there. So, as a joke, somebody snuck his headshot into my chart. I like to think it was him gunning for a second career, though. Edit. Due to the rather sensitive nature of the surgery, he hit me with a wall-up of midazolam on the way into the OR, so I was already pretty juiced by the time they started. Reply 1. I have no recollection of this, but according to my mom, when she met me in the recovery room after wisdom tooth extraction, I was very eager to tell her something, but my mouth was full of gauze. So they gave me a pen, and I wrote something on the surgical bib. Hours later, when I was back in reality, she asked me, "What was with the meow meows, my son?" I had no idea what she was talking about, so she showed me the bib. Story 9. I had a colonoscopy last month and woke up rested and totally lucid. However, when my husband had his vasectomy after our son was born, they gave him a local, it's an outpatient procedure, and some Valium and pain meds after. I stopped at Walgreens to fill his prescription, and he said, as he lolled in the passenger seat with an ice pack on his genitals, "Hey, will you get me a Coke?" I nod. "And some Doritos?" I nod again and go to leave the car. "And some Oreos? And some Reese's Cups? And some Twizzlers?" We were 38, well beyond junk food years, not stoners, and he was 6'2" and 170 pounds, not obese or a binge eater. I said, "Are you serious?" And he grinned drunkenly and said, "Yeah." I grabbed the baby carrier and said, "I'm taking the baby with me." He literally did finger guns. This man is a college professor who wears bow ties. I buy his snacks and painkillers and head back outside, and he's telling a guy at the Redbox video kiosk next to our car that his urologist said he had the best kind of penis for the procedure because his shaft is very straight and uniform. I took him home quickly, gave him his snacks, and let him sleep it off. He woke up hours later covered in candy wrappers with orange Dorito fingers and asked what happened. That was 13 years ago, and it's still the best. Story 10. As a 17-year-old, I had a colonoscopy because GI doctors couldn't figure out why I couldn't go second. I mention this as an important detail because after the colonoscopy, I was still very much under the anesthesia effects, loopy, and when my mom tried to offer saltines, I started screaming, "How many calories do those things have?" And my mom starts panicking like, "Calm down, lower your voice. People are gonna think you have an eating disorder or something." And I just said, "I can't talk quiet. What's going on?" The ironic thing was, I guess besides dysregulating my ability to control vocal volume, the anesthesia kind of acted like a truth serum in a way. No one found out I had an eating disorder until I almost died from it a year later. But I can't believe that wasn't taken into consideration as to why I couldn't go to the bathroom. Can't poop if you don't eat. It's as simple as that. As far as I know, people can suddenly start having really bad issues after eating certain foods. They would feel a pain in their gut, more to the right than the center sometimes, but it depends on each individual. Along with this unexplainable pain, it can sometimes come with severe chest pains, vomiting, diarrhea, and trouble with breathing. But the point is to stay positive and think about how it will get you out of it. Doing vice versa won't bring anything good. Story 11. Not an anesthesiologist, but I had my wisdom teeth out last week and accused the very nice nurse of being a liar. She said I wouldn't even remember the doctor coming in, and the first thing I, legibly, said was about how I remembered him coming in and putting a face shield on, and how offended I was that he felt the need to be so protected from my face juices. I also cried upon learning my dog wasn't home, thought the government was hiding the fact that there was a bucket of spinach outside of my front door. It was leaves, and no, the Canadian government did not secretly put spinach in my house, and waved at multiple terrified bystanders. Oh, and I also told the nurse while in the elevator to stay away from another doctor in the building because he's not a very nice guy. Story 12. I have to talk about the story that really touched me. At the time, I had become really great friends again with my ex. He had been diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, and the first treatment was aggressive removing 2/3 of his liver. After he was diagnosed, I was his main man for all visits and care, and very happily so. So the day comes for his surgery, and it took a very unnerving 4 hours. I had friends there to support me, thankfully. Finally, someone comes to me and says, "We're all done, and he's asking to see you," with a smile. Although we weren't technically together then, apparently he had been asking for his boyfriend. As I walk in, I can hear him singing, "Stand Back," and alternating that with, "Oh, fuck." When I finally got to him, he opened his eyes, sees me, and in the most genuine way anyone will ever tell me, says, "I love you." I bawled as he fell asleep, then laughed every time he'd wake up, ask what happened, sing "Stand Back," and yell, "Oh God." I married that man and knew that I would that day. Story 13. I don't wake from anesthesia well at all. Apparently, I get very angry and try to escape by force if necessary. I am a large man, and apparently they have had to call in multiple security people to hold me down until I'm totally awake. I have no memory of this. We learned, however, that if my wife is present when I become conscious, I just become a giant, quiet teddy bear. I apparently just stare at her and quietly tell her I love her, and anything she says I just go along with, without question. We know this because I was apparently yelling and throwing things trying to escape the hospital after surgery. Again, I have literal zero memory of this ever happening, and the wife heard me from in the waiting room. She walked over to see what was going on, but the second I saw her, I apparently just stopped in my tracks and said, "Oh, hi, I love you," and then just became totally calm and compliant. After that, because I had to have multiple surgeries on the same arm, they always made sure she was waiting for me when I woke up. Reply 1. My mom did open heart surgery for a time before choosing a different specialization. Apparently, parents are really out of it after this kind of surgery and being hooked up to all this machinery. Some manage to get out of bed, even with only steel sutures holding their rib cage together. Worst situation was the guy that made it out of his room, threw a glass bottle at a nurse, and darted in the other direction. Unfortunately for him, my mom was faster and had a syringe with a powerful sedative on her. That's of course not the ideal way of handling such a situation, but patients could injure themselves severely if they fight back and are held down with force. Story 14. My son, then 10 or so, was coming to after being under when getting his broken wrist set and cast. They had to do traction to get everything aligned or something. There were quite a few people in the room, but his drugged self directed all his attention to me. He was describing Big Daddy from BioShock and kept repeating, "Dad, you know what I'm talking about?" Because I couldn't think of the name of the game at the time. Then he gets frustrated and yells at me, "You son of a bitch." Lots of laughs from the hospital staff. Story 15. There's a song by Pepper that my brothers and I quote to each other. "What's wrong with your face?" We will randomly say it to each other. My dad was going in for spinal fusion, and during the surgery prep, my youngest brother and I kept saying it to each other. "Hey, so I know you stubbed your toe the other day, but what's wrong with your face?" My dad goes in for surgery, and all goes well. The surgeon comes out and talks to him during recovery and says, "Normally I don't discuss with patients what they say coming out of anesthesia, but I have to know why you kept asking me what's wrong with my face over and over again." My dad just burst out laughing and explained. They both had a chuckle. Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.